Gray on Gray, episode 22. I'm going to talk about some stuff today that some part of me doesn't feel allowed to talk about, which is kind of funny. You know, living in a free, democratic society with technology that allows me to put any words out there basically uncensored. Probably not completely uncensored, but basically uncensored. And yet there's a reticence to talk on this topic. There's I don't know. I'll talk freely about it. There's a fear in this topic. There's something. There are many things in this topic, and I'm currently writing an article. I've been writing it since I arrived back in Portland, and I've been taking a break on it for a while, so it's sort of sitting waiting for me. But I'm writing an article on trance as a medium to shift neurological patterning. And what that means when both for ourselves in relation to the lives we live, but also my specific interest is that of an educator. Right? So what that means from the perspective of movement education, because I think it's powerful, and largely I still operate on my feeling sense of it. You know, I don't have a lot of per se, experiments or data to back this up. Maybe I'll get there. Maybe. But oh. I'm on chat. So let's start off. Let's start off with the question of what is trance? It's pretty hard to define. I mean, I can look it up. I think it has to do with like non-ordinary states. People often talk about trance in relation to substances, also in relation to there's a movie called Trance. A fine art auctioneer joins a gang of thieves led by to steal a priceless Goya painting. During the heist, he suffers a head injury and awakes with no memory of where he hid the artwork. When torture and physical threats fail to break through his amnesia, Frank hires a hypnotherapist named Elizabeth, played by Rosario Dawson, to find the answer. But as Elizabeth probes the recesses of Simon's mind, the lines between truth and deceit start to blur. You know, and like people hear of trance music, right? So people, I think, have some sense of what it means outside of like being in a trance. If you look at the movie, what's that movie called with Angelina Jolie? She plays the dark, like, godmother person. Depart, right? I think I even talked about this, to go across trance, to go across something, to go to something new. Yeah, I talked about this in an earlier episode. And the sense of fear, how the sense of fear arose later in the meaning. The classical meaning didn't, as far as I can tell, in the etymology, right? I haven't gone back to the usage, but the older meaning of the word trance didn't have the sort of fear or this connotation with like spirit or ghost or evilness. Like there's all these sort of things like seances. She went into a trance and she channeled the dead. Okay. I mean, that's something. It's one data point. Trance. So It has something to do with non-ordinary reality. It has something to do with, I would say, and this is now going from personal experience, what is happening when I talk about going into trance. I would say that it has a focus on sensation, normally. There's a focus on sensation of the body. Now remember, I kind of refer to everything as sensation. I say we are sensing our thoughts just as much as we are sensing the feelings of our body. So I even include thought in that, right? I mean, oftentimes I feel that maybe this is a cultural thing, something that's arising at the times, that sort of physical sensations are a very apt way to move into this sort of state. I taught a dance class last night, and I taught it more weirdly than I have taught anything before. And, well, not anything, but a partner dance class, more weirdly than I've taught a partner dance class. And I very much embraced this notion of the class itself as a piece of art, a moving experience of organisms, and very much embrace this notion of trance. And I take people into a state. A lot of this is done intuitively. Not so far that they feel out of control, but I do take them into a state where they are focusing on oftentimes sensation, oftentimes thought that they might not have considered, that I have felt has a strong impact on my movement. And I do that mostly through the realm of questioning. But I would say that I kind of took the people into a light trance last night, and I started it. I've been thinking about this. How do I start a trance? A trance, I believe, has a beginning and an end to it. You're going to start to see how this idea of trance starts to overlie my theory of neurological loops or patterns. That a trance is essentially a loop, and right, if you watch all the videos where I've been talking about this, kind of starting to elucidate this theory of neurology, it's that, and it's still not fully formed yet, right? But it's going as I speak it. But it's that we are in these loops, and these loops are essentially repeating themselves, right? And it's why you'll see people repeating, or recreating scenes from their childhood, right? It's super common, super accepted in social reality. But trance, to me, so it often, this is not a defining characteristic that it's like a deepening of the senses, but it seems correlated. It seems that we go into these experiences, and we oftentimes are able to follow a continuity or continuum of sensing that can give us very different perspectives of the world, right? So once again, consciousness is not reality, right? I mean, if you think that, like, you're just behind the times. Like, go read the science. It's not really what it is. Consciousness is a filtering system, and consciousness, once again, that's a paradigm. That paradigm might be useful for 15 minutes. It might be useful for 500 years. I don't know. It's like up to other people to determine, in some sense. I mean, we're all determining what is most useful for us. But a lot of people trust science these days, right? And science is saying, like, hey man, you don't actually have like free will. No one's really looking at it yet. Like, no one's really like, wow. I mean, they kind of are, but it's like, this is kind of where the forefront is going. That consciousness is a filtering system, and all these things are happening, and mind is very deeply embedded within us. And once again, conscious thought is just a surface level understanding. Like, the real driver is under here. And we all get that in the sense of the way we make decisions emotionally and other things like that. But, like, what does this mean? Trance. So what is trance? Trance, to me, is a focusing upon a specific aspect of continuity within our sensing. Now, there are trances that can hurt us and trances that can help us, I believe. Ultimately, that has to be defined by the organism itself. But there are ways to focus the trance, and this, I think, is this starts to give us words to understand what like a sacred ritual might really be about. Like what is a shaman doing, or what is a Catholic doing as they walk the Stations of the Cross, for instance. Wonderful classic trance. Like the Mass is essentially a trance. It's got this form and this structure, and you sink deeper into your feeling of what? You know, not everyone believes in that in religion, right, and in God, and that's fine, but these people, they go to this place and they perform this ritual and they go through this thing that's the same every time so that they can sink deeper into something, right? People who go to church are not crazy, right? Like I feel like a lot of my friends who are younger and don't go to church like look at it sort of disdainfully, and I'm like, this is a ritual. It's a trance-based ritual, and most, granted, they wouldn't use those words. Most people wouldn't use those words, but here I am, you know, trying to define trance so that I can talk about things. But they go into it to have a deeper experience of something. You call that spirituality, you call that whatever you want, but it is a very real to the people who go to church. And if you talk to them without disdain in your tone, most of them will share that with you, and they will share the personal aspects and the feeling sense. But when people feel that they're going to be shut down or mocked or laughed at or not really taken seriously, of course they're not going to share the truth of the thing. Truth is a very interesting topic. Right? Truth. So trance, to me, has this quality of continuum. It just feels like things are happening, and I oftentimes feel very connected to, like, for instance, the momentum going through my body. Like, very feeling of connection, like, oh, there's my foot on the ground, and here's my shin bone, and my knee, and my femur, and my hip bones, and my spine, and, like, these are my organs, and this is how everything is moving. And it's oftentimes really focused on, like, a thought or a feeling, or really, like, all these things are arising at once, but it's like this train of thinking in the deeper sense, not just cognitively, but train of thinking of the organism. And it's a real focus on that. And in some sense, I think all trance tends, I shouldn't say all, because I really kind of think this neurological loop theory and trance are kind of one and the same, and that we're all ultimately living a trance, and that reality is really just loop trance defined. But in some sense, there is a turning away from the outer. Oftentimes there's a moving inward, and this is where you see, like, a religious or spiritual trance, like a religious ecstasy, a spiritual ecstasy. You might read stories about that, or have witnessed it, or have experienced it. But it is, in some sense, I believe that the settling into a trance is really the sort of moving into that, what was I calling it? The edge of consciousness. Yeah, the underlying movement, right? And this is often what I feel when I'm really in tune with something as it's happening. I feel like I'm, quote unquote, in the trance. And I've found my point of power at that point where the axis, you reduce the axis, like, into infinity, and you notice, like, how does it actually begin to move? Where and how do you begin to move? And then what is really directing that? And it's like, oh, like, that's somehow being in touch with the structure or the nature of reality. And this is a very Swigardian idea, that it's the formation of the thought, and then the axis tips. You know, I think I want the ice cream over there, and the axis tips. What tips the axis? Is it muscles? Is it thought? Is it my stomach desiring the ice cream? There is no ice cream, actually. Not over there. There is somewhere else. But So a trance like where people feel safe, right? A trance where people don't feel safe would be something like PTSD, right? And in some sense, there's a safety in that, right? Because that is responses that have been developed based on situations that demanded them. And then you put that responding organism into a completely different world, and all of a sudden the responses don't make sense. Well, it's not the responses that are wrong, right? This is why we really need to take a deeper look at understanding trauma and like what's happening with our soldiers and with people who go through these extreme sort of histories or life paths. Very easy to disregard people and say, oh, someone is crazy or someone is damaged or someone is these things. Like, no, they are not those things if what you mean by those things is they have wrong or inadequate responses. I don't believe that. I believe that they have perfect responses and that they've developed perfect responses through the history of their lives. And now what does that mean about relating to people and social systems? That's a question I don't have an answer to. But is it time that we look differently at people who are different from us rather than casting them as other and separate from mainstream sort of like understandings of reality and culture? Yeah, it's absolutely time. It's absolutely time. And I think that people who are unwilling to do that ultimately have learned that as a pattern, and they're unwilling to do that. So it really turns to the people who are willing to do that. And this question of where change arises, what tips the axis, right? Maybe it's you. So, trance, I believe that the safety of trance, okay, well, trance it has a beginning and an end, right? This idea of a loop. In the broadest sense, just because we have this inherent thing inside us that applies meaning to things, right? That's what we do. Most of us are not at the state where everything is a mystery, right? If everything were a mystery, I mean, sometimes I think the Zen practitioners really have gotten there, but if everything were a mystery, I wouldn't understand, what a bicycle helmet was and like what to do with it. I'm just like, who knows, maybe start eating soup out of it, and then it would start falling out, and then I'd like watch the soup falling out of the bicycle helmet, and I'd be like, oh, it's art, and then I'd be making the art, and then I'd be like, wow, it's slippery, like I'm gonna roll in it. And someone would walk in and say, he's crazy, right? And no, he's not crazy, he's like has a certain conception of the world and he's relating to it, right? But in some sense, like we bound our understanding of reality more than that. I think just inherently that we have to, that all creatures do. That's like somehow what life is. It's bounding. And this bounding idea once again arises, that's loops. The bounding idea, or the experience of the bound sort of process, like to even define what that is a huge process, right? Because it's an organism in all its complexity responding to its surroundings. How to even begin to talk about that, I don't know. But what I sort of wager and what I've been experimenting with and really thinking about is how we can shape trance. Both one, what is the role of intention setting or mindset in creating what sort of emerges from trance, but also, or how we see something, perhaps I should say, and also like how we can use that to change things, right? So how can we use that to get a different or more embodied understanding of something, right? How can we change patterns, right? And I think a lot of it has to do with trance. And this is supported somewhat by the work of like Peter Levine, somatic experiencing, and I would say pretty much all the old earth-based traditions of healing and things. I think, I don't know exactly why, but I think somehow the older peoples who lived more in tune with the earth and the seasons and the just the natural cycles of movement of the earth tended to be more steeped in mystery in some sense, more willing to go into experiences of what today we might call non-ordinary reality, right? That people could see a dream and understand it as a message, as like something that were real, to be listened to. Some of us still look at dreams that way, but a lot of us don't. A lot of us just think, well, it was a dream. It was just a dream. Like, okay, what does that mean though, right? So I think that we can use this notion of trance to bound experiences in what is ultimately a very safe way, to help us essentially rewrite patterning in our own selves. And there's this thing about the binding of it, not the binding as in like tying, but in some sense, yeah, also that perhaps, but like the bounding of something and the way that it is bound. And this, I believe, is the art of the teacher or the educator, that the teacher cannot convey their own understanding of something to a student. It just doesn't work like that. Khalil Gibran, I'll read it. Oh, look, 2 watching. Look at that. Hi, everybody. So, I don't believe that the teacher can convey their understanding to a student. What I believe can happen is the teacher can hold the space for an experience to happen and can shape and affect the intent of people, but can never define it. And so I'm going to read Gibran on teaching. I sure as hell quote it a lot. Where is it? This is one I should really have on my bookmarks. So, it is the binding which is of utmost importance, and there are a few qualities that I have found seem to be most supportive, both in terms of my own feeling of being in classes and also my own teaching and watching people grow and change. Let me read this first, though. Hey, where are you? Oh, there you are. Okay. This is Khalil Gibran from The Prophet. Then said a teacher, "Speak to us of teaching." And he said, "No man can reveal to you aught but that which already lies half asleep in the dawning of our knowledge. The teacher who walks in the shadow of the temple among his followers gives not of his wisdom, but rather of his faith and his lovingness. If he is indeed wise, he does not bid you enter the house of wisdom, but rather leads you to the threshold of your own mind. The astronomer may speak to you of his understanding of space, but he cannot give you his understanding. The musician may sing to you of the rhythm which is in all space, but he cannot give you the ear which arrests the rhythm, nor the voice that echoes it. And he who is versed in the science of numbers can tell of the regions of weight and measure, but he cannot conduct you thither. For the vision of one man lends not its wings to another man. And even as each of you stands alone in God's knowledge, so must each of you be alone in his knowledge of God and in his understanding of the earth." So ultimately, like, what do I think trance is? Trance is that moment in time, and I'm speaking specifically from a pedagogical perspective, specifically from the perspective of one person leading another or a group of people into this state we might call trance, more colloquially, right? I'm also defining it more broadly as a bigger thing, but here I'm talking about like, okay, like what most people, wow, that class was like being in a trance, you know, like, or what was that? So each one of you be alone in his knowledge of God and in his understanding of the earth, right? And that to me is what trance is, and that's really what teaching is. It's holding the space either for myself or for others to be alone in his knowledge of God and in his understanding of the earth, which is to say, to me at least, like reality. Like, this is reality. My understanding of God and understanding of the earth. Reality. Okay, here we are. So, I think that's enough now. I'm pointing at this stuff, right? I'm not really saying, well, this is what it is. I'm pointing at it. But there's a few qualities I see arising. One is a quality of strangeness that initiates trance. Something happens. Something is different. I think this is really the role that like a substance would play in evoking this state. You know, traditional ceremonies would use things like, I think, marijuana or alcohol or psilocybin or ayahuasca. Like, there are these different things. I don't think it's actually a substance that does anything. I think it's the quality of strangeness that the substance evokes from us. And that quality of strangeness is something we can be in tune in without substances. So, or we can be in tune with without substances. So it's not, I don't walk around like condoning sort of blanket substance use. And Jonathan's talking about trance, we should go do an ayahuasca trip. Like, no, like, maybe, but no. Like, maybe, but no, you know? But yeah, but no, but maybe, you know? That's not for me to decide, right? Like, that's for anyone to decide in their own realm, and to do it wisely, and to do it open-eyed, and to consider what it might mean. But the quality of strangeness, I'll tell the story of how I started my class yesterday. So we were, using a very trance-like structure in that we were repeating one song a number of times, and we were having the people tune into the song and dance to the song and dance to the musical narrative structure of the song. And actually the class had already begun. I mean, the class had begun. When does the class begin, right? I walked a circle in the room and just looked at the lights and knew that I was holding space for this circle to form, and then slowly the circle forms. It's like 30 people, it's all around. It's a big class. And we turn on the music, and the music is low, and people are hearing the music in the sort of back of their mind, but they're not aware of it yet. They're all still chatting, and then people are chatting, and I'm standing there trying to get their attention, but without commanding it, without saying, shh, hey, you, be quiet now. Like that, how does that help? You know what I mean? Right? The beginning, in some sense, of the trance defines how the trance moves. The question we ask when moving into a space, and this is any space, is going to define what we experience, right? So in some sense, a day is a trance, right? The sun rises, the sun falls. We're in a trance. Most of us do very similar movements throughout our days, right? We are in trance. We are entranced, right? And we all kind of know what happens when you wake up on the wrong side of the bed, or what happens when you like silently meditate and ask yourself a question like, how can this day be more full of love and power and connection for me, right? Like, it's just a question, but if you really ask yourself of it, it will evoke experiences and ways of, right? It's a filter, consciousness, it's a filter. It will evoke ways of experiencing the world. So there's this quality of strangeness, which in some sense wakes people up. In some sense, it brings them into a what is happening moment. It is the descent into mystery, right? Because you take an example like a class. In a class, like a movement class, right? A dance class. I taught at a dance, my friend Antia's dance, Nectar Fusion in Portland, and people go to that class every 2 weeks or a month that she holds that dance, and it's always very full, and people go to classes all the time, and they in some sense know what to expect. And so in some sense they have brought all their inherited meaning into this class with you, and in some sense they are prepared not to change. They are prepared to live the old trance that they are used to, right? And in some sense you will become the mediator of what happens. So this is how I look at it, and this is how I think about it. So I'm sitting there trying to both build buy-in and gather support for the class, and not treat them like kindergartners who have to be told what to do. I mean, I don't even want to say that, because I don't think you should tell kindergartners what to do. I think that's just bad pedagogy. And it's so subtle, it's so hard to do. Hey, you, listen, right? Done. It's done. You set the tone. That's the tone. The tone is you listen to me, right? But that's not what I value. That's not what I want in my class. I don't believe that creates a path palette that is blank enough to sustain the true sort of movement potential of most humans, like what they can do. You make them feel small and they will dance small. You make them feel big and they will dance big, right? And you can't make them, in some sense, feel anything, but you can, and you do, by holding space, in any sense of that word, create the impetus or the movement, the trajectory of this thing that's going to unfold. And so the first word to me is extremely important. So I stood there silently, here we are in the room, and everyone's sitting on the floor and I'm standing, and I thought they would quiet down, you know, playing the subtle teacher role. And then I realized, oh, this isn't gonna work. And so I got down and the music is playing. I got down on hands and knees and it crawled through the floor, and I did it slowly, and I did it in a trance. I did it with a quality of strangeness. This is something that, oh man, I should bring that up. Genzan, one of my teachers, Genzan, talks about, he says that, look, I seek to hold a place of strangeness, not so strange that people are scared, but strange enough that they understand this is different than the world I have known. And in some sense, I believe that really opens us up to the potential to change things, brings us into that moment, that knife edge of consciousness where we are not saying, this is what it is, but we're just with it. I'm gonna look this up. Got some notes here. Let's see what he said about this. I don't even know if I'm gonna find it. Strange. There are 3 stranges in these notes. So there I was crawling into the circle in a trance-like continuum of my movement, accenting the music, silently moving, and all eyes are slowly turning to me. And I am slowly turning and moving with the moment as I feel it. That in and of itself seems to me to be the work of the artist, that this work of inward turning with a moment is very much what lends power or aliveness or realness to an act. This doesn't really seem to have anything to do with what I'm talking about, but it's just so compelling. This is just like, I was just kind of transcribing things that he wrote, but I'm sure I missed things. And I'm not quoting him here, but these are from my notes. Society is schizophrenic. People say, quote, I can only get aroused with a stranger. My husband knows me too well for me to tell him what I want. People last like this, and meanwhile, sex becomes hypothetical. Of course it becomes hypothetical. Sex is not 2 bodies rubbing against one another. What is behind your physical desire? What is this kaleidoscope of your erotic imagination? What is behind touch is what makes touch. The technical is boring unless you are fascinated by the erotic mind of the person you are with. Not only this, but you feel honored that they are bestowing such secrecy into your covenant. This is real intimacy. Yeah, that's good enough for now. Yeah, I mean, so it does kind of connect, right? That I'm saying, look, it is the inward life, the inward thought, the inward emotion, the inward feeling, the inward process, the inward trance that defines one's movement and one's touch or connection with other. And I seek to bring people more deeply into awareness of that fact, like literally the present moment. And what does that mean? All the layers of meaning, all the things that means. How big is that question? So, strangeness. I crawled into the circle And I eventually did silence them with my words, but first I did it with my body. I brought them into a sort of what is happening. And I had someone tell me after, they were like, I couldn't peel my eyes from you. Right? That didn't surprise me, because I was moving in a trance. I was moving in a way that people don't move normally, right? They just release into the continuum. You see it on the dance floor, but you don't necessarily see it in normal life. And when you see it, you're aware that something is different and strange, and there's something almost like powerful and at times unpredictable. There is something that's like, what, like, you're aware that a movement is not following the social dictates, which are ultimately this sort of arbitrated thing that is laid upon us all, but that the movements are following their own sense and rhythm, which it's this thing, right? It's what you see in a tiger. William Blake, right? Tiger, tiger, burning bright, in the fires of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? In what distant deeps or spires burnt the fire of thine eyes? On what wings dare he aspire? What the hand dare seize the fire? And what shoulder and what art could twist the sinews of thy heart? And when thy heart began to beat, what dread hand and what dread feet? What the hammer, what the chain, in what furnace was thy brain? What the anvil, what dread grasp dare its deadly terrors clasp? And when the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears, did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the lamb make thee? Tiger, tiger, burning bright, in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye dare frame thy fearful symmetry? I mean, that's what Blake's talking about. That's what he's talking about. He's talking about the tiger, that the tiger's movement, the tiger's veracity in some sense, the tiger's power, the tiger's essence, the tiger's being is the tiger. And Blake is seeing through to this sort of ephemeral reality behind the actual paw and fur and muscle and growl and tooth of tiger. He is seeing through to something else, which tiger also is. And everyone knows that a dead tiger is not a tiger, right? All the physical is there, but the tiger is no longer tiger. Why? 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 It's a very real question. So, strangeness, I believe, is important. And the other thing that I really believe is important, and you know, I sit here talking at 33, you know, I've probably put, in some sense, 9 to 10 years of thought into this question. In another sense, more formally using this language, maybe only 2 to 3. So I'm very young, you know. Maybe I'll look back at this video at 83, and I'm sure I'll look back at this video at 83. I hope I look back at this video at 83, right? I hope somebody plays this video on my 83rd birthday, and I'm just like, wow, you know, because I know very little. And I'm young, and I'm exploring things that people don't really talk about. Fascinating to ask why. No one really knows, but you can infer with the anatomist's knife. So the other aspect of trance, it is not how it moves to me. It's not how it moves. How it moves is a question that must be relegated to the space of Swigardian understandings, right? That we simply must follow the dance and the trance as it arises. But what we do decide is the way that we close, right? Because all things, I think, with safety, the things that make us feel safe are bounded. We understand what they are, and we can say what they are, generally in language or at least in action, at any given snapshot, you know, whether that be a year, whether that be a minute. We can say, this is house, you know, I go in house through door, the door doesn't disappear, and all these things, you know, like. So I think we really determine how we close things. Even in some sense for our life, you look at like the death haiku, the Japanese, and then you could see that these poets were really framing their own lives. They were giving a testament in, you know, however many syllables, that gave a frame, that gave a shape and understanding of how to interpret the entire life. I don't want to read. I like that. Okay. A yellow leaf touching the green ones on its way down. Jisei. It's called Jisei in Japanese. So the question of closing is so important. I think some of the biggest violence that is done through closing is done in the name of time constraints. Time constraints. 5 minutes left. There are 5 minutes left. You know, it's, in some sense, this goes back to Glengarry Glen Ross, this idea of closing. Like, how do you close? How and when and why do you close? I'll read another one. She said, bitter winds of winter, but later river willow, open up your buds. Here's another one. Not even for a moment do things stand still. Witness color in the trees. On a journey, ill, my dream goes wandering over withered fields. Oh, they're so beautiful. Oh. So, closing, you know, I think a lot of people get really stuck on the time thing. You know, they construct their lives on the basis of mechanical clocks. Genzan was the first to say to me that time is a question of the heart. The heart, I've been trying to make sense of that since he said it, but the heart being that which ties all things together, and timing in some sense being space and being the way we move and experience the world, right? And that the heart, to know its proper timing, must tie together all things. It must know, yes, this is the mechanical clock, yes, this is the end time of the class, yes, these are my constraints, yes, these are the people, yes, da 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 da, but also must know and understand, but these are the meanings and these are the people behind the people, right? That they are tigers, that can you see what they are beyond what they quote unquote need? Can you see what you are dealing with beyond what you are teaching? Like, we cannot ultimately convey the information, we can only hold the space for another being, another organism to fill out themselves more fully, to experience the world or life in a different, more fuller way. And so much of this comes down to closing. How do you finish your experiences with someone? In the sense of class, right? How does it end? How does it end? There's a great art to it, I would say. A great art. Perhaps the greatest art. Perhaps the only art, in some sense. I wish, probably can't find it. I think it was it Basho? I don't know. Ugh. Painting, mountain. I don't know if I'm going to find this. Yeah, I don't know how I'd ever find that, but I remember a haiku, something like, he paints the mountain like as his life. That. So what the heck is Grey on Grey? It's bounded. It's got me monotonously, continuously talking about stuff that most people probably look at first glance and they'll say, what is he talking about? Or what is he not talking about? Like, why is he saying? In some sense, it's trance, right? Everything is trance. Media is trance. Media is great trance. You ever binge watched a TV show? You think that's not trance? You think you're not learning something from that? Taking something from it? An emotional movement, perhaps, for a lot of us?